Remind everyone, please, if you would, to turn your phones off. And if you have any questions, and you may have some, or any comments you want to make during the day, please see Sheena. Sheena, raise your hand. You see Sheena over here. Get the message to her, and she'll get it to a member of the committee if we need to. As the custom of all of these committee meetings, we would like to open this meeting with our prayer. So I'd like to ask Chairman Dixon if he would please open our meeting with prayer.
Will you join with me? Father, we are thankful for the day that you have given us. The Bible tells us this is the day the Lord has made. Rejoice and be glad in it. And Lord, my prayer would be that we don't make a mess of it. Guide us as we deliberate this afternoon. We offer it all to you in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. That's a good one. Let's don't mess it up. I like that. Good time.
I vote Tom all-time prayer.
I do too. That's going to be our national anthem. I'd like for all members of the committee to look. This is, Sheena, you said read across Atlanta? Read across America and Atlanta. Atlanta's part of America. Right? And it was given to us by GAE. Is that not correct? So we appreciate this. We've got another book. These books, I love them. Always glad to get these books, so appreciate that. So please take these and use them when you read with your students. This will be a nice addition to your collection, guys and gals. So as we always do we have anyone here today who is a teacher, presently teaching, and it's your first time here? Your first time here. All right. What school?
Winter Forest High School.
All right. What school? All right, that's it. Well, thank you. All right, Teacher of the Year? Who is Teacher of the Year? Hey, let's hear it for him. Teacher of the Year. Great. Now, what county?
Savannah, Chatham.
Chatham. A very good teacher. What do you teach?
International Baccalaureate History, Government, and Civics.
Very good. Well, I'm so glad you're here. So you can help us out now. We want your recommendation on what we're going to talk about today. That'd be great. At this time, we have a heavy agenda, so if you'll stick with us, I want to say to everyone, today is no testimony day. We will be asking questions, though. Those of you in the audience, you may be called on to answer a question, every one of you, any of you. So everybody's suspect, and we may call on you, but there'll be no formal testimony, so no need to sign up for any bill today. The formal testimony will take place at another time on this bill that we'll be discussing today on 364. But we will have a lot of questions and a lot of comment from people in the audience that we will be calling on. But at this time, though, Representative Kaiser has some introductions and a presentation she'd like to make. What's your mic number? If you would hit it. There you go. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I first want to just welcome Marcus Blackwell, who's going to give a brief. Not yet, Marcus. I just want to acknowledge you that you're my guest. But I do have sorry, Marcus. I do have 4 guests if they want to stand up. I have with me, and they've had time to meet with Chairman Coleman. They're in China. You can stand up so we can acknowledge you. The executive director of the Atlanta Neighborhood Charter School, the board chair, and 2 other board members are here just kind of seeing what we do today. And this is their first time in an education committee meeting, so I wanted to welcome them. I've been spending a little time with them today. It's been a lot of fun.
You also have a presentation, I think, don't you? So
I don't, but Marcus.
All right. If you'll come to the podium, all right, and introduce yourself and you're on.
It's on? Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marcus Blackwell. I'm the CEO and founder of Make Music Count. It's a mathematics curriculum taught through music. And I just wanted to thank you all for the opportunity to speak today. We don't take lightly the opportunity at greater awareness at how we're encouraging students to get better at mathematics. What I wanted to start with was a video that is an interview I had with Adam Savage from Mythbusters, which will kind of explain a little bit about what I'll be speaking with you all about today.
It's truly incredible to see.
It's very inspiring what you've built here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can you tell me what's E flat minus a half?
E flat minus a half is D.
Yes. So what I'm doing is giving every musical definition a math definition. So we're looking at the piano as a number line.
Mm-hmm.
Addition means you count this way. Subtraction means you count this way. All right?
This strikes me as not dissimilar, like a real mathematician would also have an innate sense of an equation feeling right or feeling wrong.
That's right. Yes, that's right.
Like the
yes.
numbers have shape at a certain point, right? I mean, you're kind of directly applying synesthesia.
That's right. Yeah.
D plus half is D sharp.
How many have you counted so far?
I've counted 3.
Okay.
And D sharp plus half is E, and E plus half is F. I've counted 4.
So you've counted 4?
Utopian Academy is a unique school. And that is in part because Artesius has found innovative teachers who are cultivating new methods of instruction. Meet Marcus Blackwell, the pianist and mathematician behind Make Music Count, a new mathematics curriculum combining algebra and piano playing. Make Music Count equates mathematic values to piano keys, and every time a student solves an expression, well,
There we go.
Right.
That sounds right, too.
Exactly. And that's the point. If it sounds right, that means your math is right.
Where did you get the impetus to do this? What inspired you at the beginning?
This is a solution to my own intimidation of mathematics that I had when I was growing up. A lot of times I was told that I wasn't supposed to be good at math, but I loved math. And so what made sense was playing the piano. I played the piano since I was 5, classical, jazz, and gospel. And it's always just been an interest to me to see how math and music connected. And so what I did was when I went to Morehouse for undergrad, I was like, okay, I need to get this idea out of my head, but I have the music background, but I need the math background. So what I did was I said, well, if this is going to be real, I need to use my music to really get over my intimidation, and I'm going to major in mathematics.
Wow.
I switched my major from business to math. And so I just had an epiphany one evening. I was at my piano, and I was trying to put together music terms and math terms just to see what would happen. And I just saw something, and I said, okay, that is what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
But it didn't become real, like learning an actual example, until I actually went and tested it out.
With kids.
With kids.
Yeah.
I went to my first school. I said, hey, I've got an idea. Can I try it out with your students? And I had this big old long equation that I was showing them. And the lady, she was like, this is nice, but can you just teach them 2 chains on the piano? Like a song we'd know. And I was like, yeah. and then that's how, it just, I was able to relate it to the students. I said, okay, so instead of doing what I brought, we're going to learn a song that you already know and then apply the math to it.
B flat, F, with B flat, and then C, G sharp, E flat. Oh, that sounds great.
Exactly. Want me to play it first and then you play?
Yeah, please,
Okay,
because I'm not going to get fast
So
enough
it just
for
goes
this.
like this. And it's just repeating
That's
over
so
and over
satisfying.
again. Right, exactly. So then it becomes band rehearsal.
Right.
Because you've done the math, now it's just putting it all together.
But of course, if you do this enough, you start to really understand that the underlying structure of all of these songs is relatively simple.
Right,
And you get this
right.
beautiful complexity out of it. Each reveals the other.
Exactly.
The math reveals what's in the music, and the music reveals what's in the math. That's
Absolutely.
fantastic.
Yeah. What's happening is that after they learn an example, they'll go home and say, we'll come back and say, hey, can we do this song? Can we do this song? Can you do this song? And it's like, well, sure, but there's more math to learn. And they're like, yeah, that's fine. But it's a complete attitude change. Before, these kids wouldn't even attempt to do this at all.
Right.
Now it's no problem.
Right.
And that's what we want. This is about changing our attitude towards mathematics, using music. And the kids are absolutely loving it.
B flat.
Awesome. Did you guys like that video? Okay, great. So what I wanted to point out is that the students in the video had never had a piano class before, and that actually summarizes the importance of what we're doing, is that you don't need music theory, but if you perform your mathematics correctly, you'll be able to be rewarded with playing the piano. And that's the benefit of what we're doing. A lot of times we see math and music combined in a way that produces repetition. But for this curriculum, you need to understand all the rules of mathematics in order to derive music as an end result. And so that's what we're doing here. And so the mathematics that we perform in our classes range from everything from addition and subtraction of fractions up through solving equations with algebra, understanding your variables, your order of operations, and even examples where you're graphing on the X and Y axis. So we're seeing a direct application of mathematics into another field. And so what we're doing now, currently we're in 20 schools that operate in Connecticut, Washington, D.C., and Georgia. And we're making a very great impact. I mean, if you can see the engagement levels just in the video, it's like that every time. Because what we're doing is we're bringing songs that they recognize and that they listen to at home and using it to produce a whole level of engagement in mathematics like we've never seen before. And so, as far as data is concerned, our curriculum is ideally a 10-week program. And after the 10 weeks, we see about a 28% increase in test scores. And that's gathered from us from just giving a simple pre-test and post-test, within the curriculum. And so we're excited that we're getting students excited about math again. A lot of times students have created this phobia towards mathematics where they won't even attempt problems. And so now we're coming in saying, okay, well, let's look at math this way. It's the same rules, just musical notes instead. And so as of right now, fractions, algebra, graphing, the math goes even further, which is going to allow us to work with even higher levels of education. Right now we're 3rd grade through 9th grade. We're looking to go all the way up through 12th grade with the calculus and even to higher levels of education as well. Are there any questions?
26.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question, but I don't know if you knew this, but the Pythagoras, with the famous guy with the triangle, he was a musician, believe it or not, and he realized back in ancient times that all music was based on math. So this is brilliant of you to do this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Now, where school? Tell us what schools.
That are here in Georgia. So we're in Cleveland Elementary currently, Ivy Prep Academy. The video that's where the interview was shot was at Utopian Academy in Clayton County. We've been in South Cobb High School, South Gwinnett High School, just hitting all the outside areas. And so right now we're interested in what does this look like on a broader scale. We're proving that 20 schools operate at the same time works just fine. The way that works is that we go and hire undergrad students and train them and then send them out because it's after school ideally. Good. And it's a great fit because they're young as well. So,
25.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to add, just to preface his coming to the meeting, he was here with a group of young entrepreneurs, and I don't know if you remember the Music Industry Study Committee. We traveled the state, and as we traveled the state, music seemed to always overlap with the STEM courses. And so when he was here, we just started talking, and it just sort of clicked that I thought this would be something really neat for the Education Committee to get to hear what it does for your brain in the STEM area with music.
I think it's so interesting, thinking out of the box, doing things differently, and children getting them involved. They love the music. They hear it all the time. It's in there. They can memorize it, do it. So I commend you. And maybe you can take us on a tour sometime. We can visit one of your schools. That'd be fun.
That'd be great.
So why don't you get with Representative Kaiser, and maybe you can set something up for us. We'd like to do that.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you so much. All right. All right. At this time, I recognize, all right, 17, yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you for this. I got here a little bit late, and I noticed a couple of gentlemen from my school district, Cherokee County School District, here today. They do an outstanding job in our district. We have our brand new superintendent of schools, Dr. Brian Hightower, if you'd wave at everybody. And with him is Mike McGowan. He's the Director of Planning and Intergovernmental Relations for our county. Both these gentlemen do a fantastic job. So I wanted to welcome.
Glad to have you all with us today. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Thank you. All right, at this time we'll get on to the agenda. So on our agenda we had a lot of bills come over from the Senate, and we're going to assign them. So I ask our chairpersons. I think Representative Clark is out, so if you'll, Representative Chandler, if you'll take care of this, Representative Nix and Representative Dudgeon. So listen carefully for the bills, and we have hearings already set up for most of these. So please listen, and we'll talk to you when the hearings are going to be also. All right, Representative Dudgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 1078, Representative Kaiser, to raise the mandatory education age to 17, academic achievement. House Bill 1091 from Representative D. Dawkins Hagler, related to Love is Not Abuse curriculum, also academic achievement. Senate Bill 364 is here today in full committee by Senator Tippins, related to testing and evaluation. Senate Bill 310, related to grant applications being reported to the General Assembly, Senator Ligon, is academic achievement. Senate Bill 328, related to alternative school placement policies, Senator Emmanuel Jones, academic support. Senate Bill 355, relating to opting out of testing, Senator Ligon, academic achievement. Senate Bill 357, related to school board standards and ethics, by Senator Michael Williams, is academic support. Senate Bill 409, related to posting phone number for abuse reporting in schools, by Senator Van Ness, academic support. House Resolution 1564 by Representative Clark, related to urging about cardiac arrest training, is academic support. And we will get the Sheena will send out this list later on today.
And we have two hearings. I think you have a hearing scheduled for what, Monday?
We have a Monday at 2 and Tuesday at 2 also, with I think 3 bills on each of these, and we'll try to work some of these other ones in sooner than later.
And where the committee members will know, we do have a major education committee meeting Wednesday at 2 o'clock. And I want to inform everyone, with the calendar like it is and time of the essence, we may have 2 meetings that day. We may have 2 education meetings, one that morning and one that afternoon. And we also may have one Thursday. So just be on the lookout for a notice for a full education committee meeting, because we have so many bills. I want to be sure we give everybody good hearings and that we're here. But we definitely have one set for Wednesday at 2. Wednesday at 2. That's when we will have the presentation of the Senate Bill 364, and we may have one that morning also. But we'll let you know later. Okay. At this time, any questions about what we've just said? All right. If not, I'd like to ask Representative Strickland. I think you're going to be presenting Senate Bill 309 for the author, which is Senator Jones. Is that correct? That's correct. So if you'll come forward, and remember, we appreciate brevity. So, because we've heard this bill, is what I'm saying. Yeah. That's the only reason. We've heard this bill 3 times, so this is the 4th time. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I bring you Senate Bill 309. This is the same as my House Bill 870. Which we heard in a subcommittee, full committee, and also on the floor of the House, passed out unanimously this committee a few weeks ago. Dealing with the High School Association, all this bill says is that if 2 schools want to play each other in sports, as long as they agree in writing, they meet all the safety requirements we have right now at the High School Association, they can play each other. The bill also deals with religious expression and says an association can't pick and choose what type of expression is allowed. You have to make sure you're following the rules of the event. You have the rules that are put in place, which always controls this. And so you have the rules and also safety, which will always trump that as well. That's it, Mr. Chairman. We've debated this bill a lot, and I'll be happy to answer any questions anybody has.
And isn't it true that this bill, that the Georgia High School Association has really complied with most of this, and they've already allowing, they're going to abide by the federal guidelines as far as their expressions, but as far as the play, that's been taken care of, and the playing from the magnet schools has already been taken care of. Is that not true?
That is true.
Okay. I have a question, number 27, Representative Tanner.
Mr. Chairman, since we've heard this bill multiple times, unless there's other questions, I'd like to make a motion.
All right, what was your recommendation?
Well, let me ask a quick question of the representative. Are there any changes between this bill and the House bill that we passed? And if they are, what are those changes?
There's only one change, and it's on line 22. The words personal and voluntary have been added in for our religious expression. The Senate wanted to make sure that we clarify this is not any sort of group.
It's on line 22,
expression.
is that right?
Line 22, which I was in support of that. If I'd had a chance, would have done the same thing with my bill before we passed it too, just confirm this is personal and voluntary expression.
Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, I'll make a motion.
All right, I have another question, then I'll come back to you. Number 25?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I realize that this is the same bill as the one we debated in committee before, and the process has gotten really sped up with crossover day and now 9 days ago. So my question is that I've been emailed and asked this. Does the Georgia High School Association support this bill?
I don't want to speak for them. I know they have a couple folks that are here today.
Okay, so someone will be speaking?
No, no one would be speaking.
No
I will
one's
answer that
speaking.
question. I personally met with them. They don't see the need for it, but they do agree with it. They have complied, and they know and I have told Gary myself that we're moving it forward. So he's very much aware of what's happening in the bill. Yeah.
Okay, can I ask a second question?
Yes, ma'am.
So the follow-up to that question, because I was asked about the Georgia High School Association, because the question that was asked specifically of me, and I can't answer, I said I'm not the author of the bill, is this bill intended to allow people to express their religious beliefs?
Only if the rules of that event allow it. My understanding is our Georgia High School Association follows these National Federation rules, which don't allow any types of articles of clothing for the most part, any type of logos, except for a logo from the person, I guess from the company that that the uniform was purchased from. And so right now, the way this is written, the rules will always trump any type of expression. So if expression is allowed in any particular event, they can't pick and choose which type of religious expression will take place. But if the rules say you can't have a headband with writing, for example, you can't have a headband with writing, period.
But tell them why the bill, that was not the reason the bill was brought. Please tell them why the bill was brought.
The reason the bill was brought is you had two major different private school associations, one of which, the Georgia High School Association, was allowing to play their public schools in sports. In doing so, they were prohibiting the other private school association playing other private schools. So you had two associations, like in my district, I had multiple schools, members of both these associations. They couldn't play each other in sports. Two schools even shared the same cross-country track because they're members of two different private associations, one which was let in by the association, one which was not. They couldn't even play each other in sports, despite the fact they agreed, even practice games. And so this bill really was set up for the section that gets a little bit less attention, the meat of the bill, which is Section 2 in this, Section C, which says that two schools want to play each other, they agree in writing to play each other, they meet all the safety requirements, they're all high school kids, they can play each other. And that's why I brought the bill.
Okay, right. I was in there. I was in that meeting, so I recall that. I just have some unreadiness now, and I understand we're not going to hear from the high school association. So,
yeah. Well, I was in contact with him. I have been in contact with Gary with the bill. He knows we're moving it today. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. I see no other questions. Representative Tanner.
A motion do pass.
I have a motion do pass. Do I have a second? I have a second. Any other questions? All in favor of the bill, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, like sign.
No.
All right, please indicate one no, okay? All right. Your bill's passed. Thank you. All right.
Thank you all.
All right. At this time, I would like to ask, if you would, if Senator Tippins would come forward, and you can bring anyone you want to with you. This is not, I want to tell everyone, this is not a hearing. This is a work session that we're having. There'll be no vote taken. We're going to be talking. I want to say that I've asked Representative Nix up here to work with the first part of the bill. I've asked Representative Clark and Representative Chandler to work with the second part of the bill. They've done quite a lot of research with the State Department, with others on the bill. But at this time, I talked with Senator Tippins earlier, and I said to him that I wanted him to come and just tell us his reasons why he's doing the bill, to tell us a bit the mission, the goals, and what the bill is basically about. And then we will open it up for discussion. So we'll be working on Senate Bill LC 336526S. Is that correct, Senator? 336526S. And we'd ask if you would to please speak right in the mic, because it's not picking up very well, they say, and they can't hear you. I've just gotten a notice that they're broadcasting this and they're not hearing us online. So for us to please speak into the mic, pull it up close to you. They said, all right.
Can you hear me?
Well, can they hear? They said yes. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's my pleasure to bring to you Senate Bill 364. I believe it's important before we look at the bill itself to look at the background of the bill and why the bill is before you today. I think all of us have heard through the years critical voices about public education and what it does or what it doesn't do. I've heard it and framed in the context of things need to change. I've heard people talk about it status quo. It's people who have critical evaluations of that. I've also heard people say public education hasn't changed in 100 years. I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't agree with it. I believe that it's changing all the time. I know just in the last 20-something years that I've been involved from a policy standpoint of public education, it's changed tremendously. On the other side of that argument or those criticisms, I hear people in public education say, if you gave us the flexibility that you would give maybe charter schools, we could do a lot more because we're having to operate within fixed boundaries. And it's my intention through this bill to grant flexibility and grant a nimbleness that each district, given the students that they have, given the communities that they have, through the contracts that they have for flexibility and nimbleness with the state, can craft a model that is the best for their district, that meets the needs of their students. And I say meet the needs of their students because too often I think public education discussions revolve around adult issues and not the issues of the student. And I think we've got to look at student achievement primarily, first and foremost. I want to reframe the conversation. I want us to talk about continuous improvement, whether it's from the standpoint of the students or those who were charged with the responsibility to deliver our education outputs. And I want to use an example for your consideration, Henry Ford. Now, I know the chairman and I remember vividly in our history books when we were little children.
The Model A, yes.
No, it was the Model T. But I remember they had a picture of Henry Ford rolling out his first little model that he built in his shed in his backyard in 1896. A home craftsman that came up with a product because he was intrigued with the possibilities of the internal combustion engine. And he built it on his own. And it's a far cry from what we see in the automobile industry today. And when we think of Henry Ford, we think about the Model A and the Model T, but I think you have to go back and look at the history of how all of that evolved. And this is not just a history lesson. I think this goes to the principle of what we see evolving in the world of education today, in the universe of education. Henry Ford is often associated with the Model T. That was the first major automobile he came out with. Although he built his first car in 1896, the Model T that gained all the early fame came out in 1908. The Ford Motor Company produced that for 20 years until 1927. But prior to that, he built many different variations of automobiles, and none of them were necessarily the same because they were custom built. But Henry Ford had different models, and it was a model, he went under a principle of continuous and continual improvement. Each car that he built was a better model than the one before, and he learned from his mistakes. He was innovative. He wasn't always successful. His first commercial venture prior to Ford Motor Company that was incorporated in 1903 was an absolute financial failure because it was undercapitalized. So he knew what failure looked like. But he incorporated the Ford Motor Company in 1903, and they came out with a Model T in 1908, and it changed the history of the automobile. Prior to that, the average cost of the automobile in the United States, and this was in the early 1900s, over $2,000 was the average cost. And through the efficiencies that were gained in the production of the Model T, the cheapest models got down to $376 per unit for the most stripped down model. It put the Model T automobile within the price range of anyone who had a job. One thing about Henry Ford, he appreciated the input of good people and many people. He surrounded himself with people who were innovative, who could look at a situation and make it better. He didn't mind copying other people. He was involved in a lawsuit known as the Selden patent suit because Mr. Selden claimed that he owned the patent on the automobile. But Henry Ford, many of the aspects that he put in his car were pioneered originally by other people. Ransom Olds was the first automobile dealer that used an assembly line for an automobile. That was in 1901. But through all of this, he came up with continual improvement. He built the Model T for 20 years. I've got a 1927 Model T. There was a world of difference between the 1908 Model T and the 1927 Model T. All through that process was a process of continual improvement. And in 1928, he came out with a Model A, and that was even better. And in 1932, he came out with a V8 engine. And since 1903, the Ford Motor Company has been improving their vehicles every year. We're not going to have a silver bullet to fix education, but if we're going to make education what it ought to be with an eye toward a continual improvement. We need to realize that people can fail. People can make mistakes in judgment and get up and go again and be successful. That's what my bill attempts to do, is to grant people the flexibility to be creative, the flexibility to be innovative, and tailor an education model to the needs of a student. While Henry Ford had standardized parts, and he came out with basically the first automatic transmission, he continued to improve on them every year. They got better, and we need to do that in education. We don't need to be a monolithic institution. We don't need to be stable. We need to take informed risk in education, not stupid gambles, but an informed risk in areas that we can get a return on our investment that we expect for our educational dollars. My intention in bringing this bill was to do that, was to bring a bill that would lead to efficiency and increased effectiveness in the field of education. The number one complaint that I hear is that we're inundated with too many tests. The Republican caucus in the Senate made that one of their priorities this year, was to address testing, to address duplicitous and excessive testing. The parents believe that. The students believe that they're being over-tested. The teachers believe we're over-testing, because this country has had a craze that we've got to measure everything by an objective standard, regardless of whether it's objective material or not. I told a reporter the other day, I believe one of the problems that we have is everybody's wanting to count the beans in education, and sometimes there's not any beans there to count. Some of the courses we teach don't lend themselves to an objective, quantitative measure. I'll submit to you, if you go into any school in the state of Georgia and you ask the students and you ask the administration, and if you ask the rest of the teachers, you ask the parents, you ask the business community, name me the 5 best teachers in this school, they'll name who they think the 5 best are. And almost invariably the top 3 were going to be the top 3. And you may have 3 or 4 people compete for that slot, 4 or 5. But everybody knows who the good teachers are. And bear in mind, that is a completely subjective evaluation, but it's scarily accurate. So as we look at the evaluation of education, we have the ability to use some subjective measures that are buttressed by objective measures to make those determinations. This bill looks more at education inputs than it is education outputs. I believe that's where you get your efficiencies. If you change the input, if you can change the methodology, if you can free up people to use resources in the area that truly get the best return on investment, we'll have a better output. We talk about high school dropout rates. We talk about how many people we have taking remedial courses in college. Most of that goes back to the fact that we did not get the foundation right. This bill deals with that. But first and foremost, this bill was intended to be a reduction in testing. The state of Georgia requires almost 3 times the number of standardized testing that the federal government requires. Under the Reauthorization of Education Act in December, we were freed from many of the onerous requirements that we had for excessive testing. And this bill was an attempt to streamline the mandated testing and to increase the classroom instruction efficiency. I've heard from teachers, they say it seems like we're having to give some kind of a test or have some kind of a survey or an assessment 30 to 40 days a year. We don't need to interfere with classroom instructional days. Number one, I don't believe that teachers mind being assessed, but they want a fair assessment. I don't believe people mind being evaluated or being accountable. We all need to be accountable in any job that we hold, in any position that we hold in. We have an accountability to do the best job that we can do. We need to look at our testing. We need to look at the assessed areas that lend themselves to standardized testing. We also need to realize in the area of SLOs, the student learning objectives. I don't know that I would have used that as an acronym associated with education, but in the areas of SLOs, if you read this bill, through the negotiation of a flexibility contract with a state or through an agreement with a state, a school district can make provisions for accountabilities that are appropriate for the student makeup of that school and the particular courses that they need. One of the problems with SLOs is in one big group we take in all those tests, all those subject matters that are not known as the assessed courses. Well, the problem is even though we call it one group, there's a vast difference between those tests that make up that classification of the non-assessed areas. It needs to be appropriate. Whatever the measure of student achievement is, needs to be tied back to the course expectations of excellence, the standards that we expect from the front end. But there again, it has got to meet the student makeup of that class and of that school. We're looking for flexibility, and we're looking that all students will be evaluated properly. Second part of this bill, and it's the one that probably I'm as excited about as any, I think it restates our mandate for a guaranteed mastery of reading and the 4 basic math skills by the entering of the 6th grade. It's a true K-5 perspective. Those schools, those elementary schools, need the flexibility to apply the available resources toward the areas of the highest priorities. And I think as a matter of public policy, we need to state our number one academic highest priorities are reading by the 3rd grade and math mastery by the end of the 5th grade of those 4 basic functions of math. If you look at remedial courses today in college, the vast majority of them are because they're deficient in mathematics. If you look at the common denominator of the high school dropouts, it's low reading scores. Most of them are not on target. And if you go back and you look at the longitudinal data, if you can track them when they exited middle school and when they exited elementary school, they were deficient at that time. We need to have a mandate. If we get nothing else right, we need to have a guarantee that they're going to be on track with reading and mathematics by the end of the 5th grade. People say, well, what about reading at the 3rd grade? What are you going to do in the 4th and 5th grade? I think you've got to have a continuation of it, but I think that's an ideal time to bring in the skills of literacy infusion in all disciplines of study. We cut back a little bit on the required science and social studies test in 3rd and 4th grade, in 6th and 7th grade. Does that mean that they're not important? Absolutely not. What it means is that's a state mandate. If you look farther in this, you'll see that we talk about formative assessments. Really, you can have a state mandated end of the year test and you know too late that you have a problem. A formative assessment will give you early identification and the possibility of early intervention in those students' lives. I believe it's more important to know where a student is so you can get the resources there quicker to get that student back on track. And the quicker you get them on track, the quicker they're going to be successful. But I'll promise you this, if a student is not on track on reading and they're not on track on math, they're not going to be a successful student. Thirdly, the bill deals with teacher assessment or teacher evaluations and the portion of it that is tied to standardized testing. It cuts it from 50% to 30%, and through the agreement with the state, that can even be reduced to 20 if they. And you can utilize other multiple measures or indicators of student achievement, because student achievement's important. That's our core business. But I think we need to look at the inputs instead of the outputs so much. The outputs will speak for themselves if we get the inputs right. We also look at professional development of the teachers and professional improvement. We talk about student improvement. It's a question of how well are the teachers doing. I really think part of the problem we have in our evaluation system today under the 4 domains of exemplary, proficient, and I think the area of needs improvement is an area that needs improvement. You know, if you look at it, how many times do we have a new teacher come in that's proficient by the start of their 3rd year? But if a teacher gets the needs improvement for 2 years, they're subject to be under sanction on their certification. I believe the teaching profession is like Henry Ford, a situation of continuous improvement. You need to continue to get better, and you can need improvement. But if you're making gains, I don't believe that a certification ought to be in jeopardy. And I think if we reframe that conversation, the fact that someone needs improvement, I think if we're honest with ourselves when we look in the mirror, we all probably need improvement. But I don't know that we all want to volunteer to be in jeopardy. If you look at other areas in this, it also changes the percentage for leadership on student achievement. Drops that to 40%, 30 of which has to be the milestones or the specified state end of the year course. One of the big changes, it goes from 65% attendance requirement for a student's scores to be counted toward the teacher. It goes to 80% attendance. I think this is huge. And in retrospect and thinking about this, and especially in the areas of courses that are a 1-semester course like a block schedule, I believe that 90% would make sense, because you only have 90 days of instruction, and if you lose 18 days out of 90, I'm not sure you can come back from that under block scheduling. I think 80% probably would work on 180 days. I understand y'all have some interest in looking at that. I think you need to look at it, do what you think is reasonable, but I do think, especially in the areas of block scheduling or 1-semester courses, that it probably needs to go to 90%. I believe we need to be clear We don't need to hold teachers accountable for those areas over which they have no control. This also has a tiered evaluation system that can be worked out at a local level. Those who are evaluating the teachers, they know who the good teachers are. They know who the veterans are. I'm not sure that we need to have 6 mandated observations a year for every teacher. If you know your staff, and that's critical at good leadership, you can have less evaluations from those teachers who have the proficiencies and put that time mentoring teachers so they will be farther along on the spectrum of continuous improvement. As far as the testing, this bill requires that there be a testing for reading and mathematics at the end of 1st and 2nd grade. I don't believe we currently have that, but as I said earlier, this speaks to a formative assessment. I think some of the most effective models that we've seen are those districts that have formative assessments that are frequent, but they also have a component that can be converted to an end-of-the-year summative assessment, and I believe that meets the requirement that we have to truly know where our students are in a one benchmark once a year. We've heard promises before. If you've got a system that works, if you've got a doctor you like, you can keep them. That's not always been the case, but this bill says if you have a system that works, you can keep it with the approval of the DOE. I believe that's fair. I don't believe we ought to uproot districts that have good evaluation systems and specify that we have one evaluation system or one formative evaluation for the state, because I don't believe it's going to be uniform throughout the state. I believe it's going to be governed more by the makeup of the student population and the communities they find themselves in. Another addition was that all assessments adopted by the state shall be verified for reliability and validity by a nationally recognized research-based third-party evaluator. This came about because we've heard complaints that the tests that we have aren't necessarily proven for validity and reliability. This ought to guarantee that. And lastly, I know it's a recommendation that the testing window be moved to the last possible dates of the school year or the semester. And if it's a one-semester course, we're recommending that as far as practical, that would occur within the last 5 days of the semester. And if it's an end-of-the-year test, it would occur within the last 10 days. I think we have inadvertently, by having an accelerated testing windows, we have probably created the equivalent of a much higher negative effect than we would if we just told people you can have maybe 15 or 20 absences during the year. I don't believe by design we ought to have early scheduled testing. I think we've got to be practical about this, but I think in the age of technology, I think we ought to be able to turn around the grading. I've had teachers tell me that when they were doing paper and pen test, they were given in the last week of school and they had to get the grades out. If we've got to renegotiate contracts for turning these test results around, we ought to do that. These are the major components of this bill. I hope you'll look at it. I'm not telling you it's perfect. If there's ever been a perfect piece of legislation that came out of the legislature of Georgia, I've never seen it. But we've had some good ones, and I believe this one has the makings to be a good bill, and I'd appreciate your favorable consideration.
Mr. Chairman, you did a good job. I tell you what. We're going to move you to the House. I tell you what. You're about ready to be promoted.
I'd have to clean out my office.
Oh, well, that'd be horrible. All right. We have, I know, well, you know what we're doing. No vote today. I want all your questions answered. I want us to ask the Senator President. I'm going to ask Representative Nix to come down in a few minutes, and he has some questions for you that we're going to look at this in 2 parts. The first part of the evaluation and the testing component, but we may just, depending on how the calendar goes, we may just do the evaluation component first, so we'll go from there. But I have a couple of questions for you right now. So first of all, Representative Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious if you could tell me what are the state-mandated tests besides the milestones at certain grade levels and the EOCT/SLO at the high school level. What other state mandated tests are there out there?
I'm going to ask the superintendent, state school superintendent.
I think we have a chart, Representative, and that'll help you, Superintendent. Let us show you the chart, then you can go over it. Why don't you pass those out, if you would, Representative? She's been working on that, and then we'll go with the superintendent. Please help us
Chairman,
out.
I would ask, too, that if any questions need to be directed to the Superintendent Richard Woods, feel free to do that on my part. We have worked together on this bill and tried to get as much collaboration from as many parties as we could. So
And we may, if you don't mind, Superintendent, we may even ask some members of your staff that we've talked with about a couple of things. So no one get your feelings hurt, because we're going to you can ask anyone you want. Have you passed these out?
Again, looking at the requirements, again, as far as the state.
Do you have one of these?
Yes,
You see what we're doing.
Again, looking at kindergarten, our G-Kids assessment is required. Beginning in grades 3 through 8, you will find that during the testing window that we will have a requirement to take a social studies, a science, a math, English language arts, and a reading portion. So basically that'll be 5 tests throughout that. Once you get into high school, then you will look at taking, I think it's, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8 end of course tests. You'll have 2 math, 2 English, 2 science, and 2 social studies. And that is a requirement as far as looking at the standardized test, standardized test. Outside of that, right now we also have the student learning objective, the SLOs. We have kind of a mix where this year it's been moved to 1. Prior to that, it was any non-tested, subject matter or course matter that a teacher, I think, had to take that. There has been some, like I said, we did have some flexibility with that this year. It is going to move up to 2 testing objectives the next year for everyone across the state. So that is what we are looking at as far as what we require. Looking at the requirement from the federal government, but again, especially in the area of standardized testing. What they show is that in grades 3 through 8, you only have to have math and English, language arts, and reading. Those are the requirements. And you will have, I think, 1 science and 1 social studies measure. And also that, I think that goes up for, let's see, if you look at the bottom chart as well. Let's see. Okay, that's, federal requirements. 1 for ELA, 1, for math, and again, 10th and 12th. One's for science. So we are a little bit over, again, as the Senator mentioned, as far as above the federal requirements of testing.
Would you please, for some of them, I'm sure all of them know, but would you please tell what SLOs mean, what we mean we say SLOs, and tell us what it is and why, who develops them and what that, please explain that.
Well, the student learning objective, and again, there's really a battery of tests. They are really for required tests, such as what I mentioned here, all the federal requirements outside of English, language arts, math, science. So they could be any courses ranging from PE to culinary arts, any of the things that we do not have a standardized test for. And so those tests, again, they were adopted, or at least during the Race to the Top initiative. Again, as we began through that process, as basically, again, in my opinion, really for an accountability piece, that it did not touch, or we did not have a test system that would measure teacher growth in those areas. And so they were created to, for an accountability piece for those teachers in non-tested areas that I've mentioned before.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
Yeah, okay. Other question?
Well, I wanted to elaborate a little more on what we just heard. So in the 1st through the 8th grade, we're looking at really 5 days of testing if you test all 5 of those subjects, correct?
Yes.
And then in the 9th through 12th grade, you're looking at EOCTs for 8 courses, which will be 1-day tests at the end of those 8 courses. And then SLOs, which is likely 2 tests for that each one of the courses that a SLO is.
Yes.
So
pre-test and post-test, yes.
But this is what the state of Georgia requires teachers to test. So how are we that much more? How is the state requiring so much more than the federal government? And I say that because I'm hearing about all these tests that local systems are requiring, but they're not because the state of Georgia is requiring those local systems to test. It's evidently the local systems have decided to test for those different things. It's not that the state of Georgia is requiring them to. Is that my understanding?
In what regard? Now, the milestones is mandatory.
I understand that, but I've seen list upon list of tests that students are having to take throughout their K-12 experience. But those tests are not listed here on this list of what the state of Georgia is requiring.
Superintendent, what she's saying is, I can tell System A, they're giving 50 days of testing a year.
Yes.
The state's requiring 12. That local system is requiring those others, is what she's saying. Is that correct?
There would be some other tests.
And I'm not saying it's that many, but.
Yeah, well, I think it varies. Now, again, some school systems, they will have a different, additional tests on top of what we had mentioned. Of course, again, the student learning objectives, again, really expanded testing throughout the state of Georgia.
Okay.
But again, what you must understand, again, if I were probably to look and find out what these tests are, many of these are benchmark testing. But again, what we're looking at, because that test is so directly tied to accountability, to a school's accountability, to a teacher's accountability. So I mean, you're looking now that we have to measure what people perceive to be measuring, progress of children, so that they can adequately say, are we meeting those mandated requirements based on the testing themselves?
So you're saying the state may be doing more tests than this?
But you're saying
that
the
locals may be
the
doing
locals are doing it for benchmark reasons, to see how the students.
Yes, it could be there, but again, like I said,
but it's not mandated by the state for the locals to do that.
Not mandated from the test.
Okay.
I mean, for the state, no, ma'am.
One more quick question on a different subject. Regarding Section 2, what happens to the student who does not pass that additional test that we're adding through this legislation, or the additional test, the reading and the math test? What happens when the student doesn't pass that test?
Okay, in that section itself, that is not a high stakes test. So again, what we've looked at is to make sure that, and that was one of the things in talking with the senator and working through this, we did not want to make this a high stakes test. Ultimately, the goal is the senator has mentioned, and again for myself, and I know the governor, has mentioned, I guess, concern about a reading level. Some type of evaluation has to take place. But what we've looked at across the state, what is taking place is that many school systems already use a formative type assessment for this. And again, this is, kind of periodically, whether it's the MAP test, which many systems use, could be the STAR, could be DIBELS. And again, this is used to measure progress during the course of the year to make sure that our kids are reading on grade level and progressing to ultimately, again, where they are, first tested for English at the third grade level.
Okay.
So, those are things at which there is no accountability to get as far as looking at high stakes testing. But it is to make sure and really to reinforce the concept that we as the state of Georgia believe that reading is important. And by doing so and saying that this is what we are focusing on, especially in the K-5 area, that we want to make sure that we are monitoring some way. And really, to be honest, and with many school systems, as a teacher, and especially with someone very familiar with the K-5 area, this is what takes place on a day-to-day basis. It's what takes place naturally. So we are not asking schools to necessarily go above and beyond, nor requiring them, to purchase anything, because most of them are already doing this. But it is a reinforcement that to let people know in the state of Georgia, our children will read. They will have foundational math and be able to move on, and so that they can succeed in middle school and high school and beyond. But we have to have some type of measurement with that. But that's just good teaching practice.
All right, we got about 15 lights on here now. Okay, 26.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate you taking this bill, Senator Tippins. This is a great bill. I'm curious if there's any discussion about allowing us to use MAP instead of the standardized state DOE, especially for English language and math. We do MAP at our schools in Morgan County. We absolutely love it because there's a beginning, there's a mid, and there's the end. And just any discussion on that?
I think the bill addresses that, and I believe it, especially in the K-5 grades. And
just speak right into it. You're not close enough.
I believe it's going to actually be a question of which assessment gives us the best feedback, which goes back to building the Model T automobile. You have to figure out which component, which edition gives you the most end result good. And I'm not saying that Milestones is the best product out there. I'm not saying it is the worst. I think we, through a process of continual evaluation, if we have a different assessment that does a better job, I think we ought to be in that discussion. I do think those formative assessments, and I'm not trying to push anybody's product, but I believe MAP as one has a conversion component to a summative assessment that would give us the type feedback we need. I know many districts are using it. I know some districts are developing an entire system of formative assessments that do have a conversion component. And you know, the only thing that I would say along those lines, I do believe there needs to be some nationally norming in them, because that's what we're really looking at, is how Georgia students compare, not with other Georgia students, but with students throughout the United States and over the world, because we're in a world economy. And I believe it's necessary when we say our students are on grade level or where they need to be, there needs to be validity to that. I think the wake-up call we've had was through NAEP, and to see the discrepancy in those scores, and we need to make sure that we close those voids, that there can be a discrepancy between test scores and what a nationally normed test would show us.
All right, number 23.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Tippins, a couple of things I wanted to ask you about, and you touched on this just a little bit when we talk about making some relatively small changes, as you talk about changing the cars over. On the top of page 3, when we go on the student growth portion, the top line there, student growth shall count for 30%, but then we come down and we say that a minimum of 20% on annual state assessment. So really we're going from 50% to 20% from where we were before. Is that, am I reading that wrong? What would the other 10% be, I guess?
It'd be multiple measures or multiple indicators of student achievement. If you had a map in addition to a milestone, you could use multiple indicators that are valid. All this says is you're not going to 20%, which is going to be student growth. You've still got 30%, but 20% of it would have to be the milestone, but you could use other indicators. I'm not sure that a single test on a single day is the best indicator that we can have. I mean, certainly I think it's got some validity, and I've just, you know, right, wrong, or indifferent, I've always thought that TBS were probably at one time when I was involved in local education, it gave a great feedback on a one-day snapshot of where a student is. But we also know that sometimes a one-day snapshot is not the most accurate snapshot. I think the greatest benefit to a formative assessment with a conversion component is that you have the flexibility to have early identification. One thing we're going to have to do in the state of Georgia, if we're going to get serious about reading, we've got to have reading diagnosticians to figure out why a kid's not reading. And Brooks Coleman's already forgotten more about this than I know, but you know, we don't need, going back to the car analogy, we don't need to start swapping parts until we happen on the one that happens to be defective. We need to be able to diagnose what the problem is and fix that problem, and not fix a half a dozen other things before we just happen on what the solution might be.
Okay.
Can I
go one more?
Yeah, one more. Yeah.
On the slows that you discussed, also on the same page there, if I'm looking at it correctly, starting on 79, line 79 and going through that, we would be eliminating the state board approval of slows. When we first did this, we said that the local board would develop them, but they would have to be approved by the state board, kind of with the thought we'd develop a bank of tests there for the slows. Is that eliminating the state?
In my mind, it is eliminating slows as we know them today, but it's not eliminating or doing away with making a determination of student growth and student achievement. I believe we've got to be able to have some sort of evaluation of students, but if you take a course like music, I think it's hard to get a quantitative appreciation of that. There are some art courses, I don't know how you would have a quantitative evaluation on a score, But I do believe that teacher observations as far as how well a student meets their course objectives that are outlined at the start of the course. Representative Carter's taught school for a long time, but you know, I'm not an expert in education, but I do know this: if we talk about getting away from one size fits all, I do think SLOs, but not in the individual test, but in the design of SLOs, we say we're going to have a type of test that's going to apply to everything that's in a non-assessed course, and I think that's a mistake. I think you're going to have some variance there. And I think the evaluation has got to be able to fit the course, and I believe the reason this was can be handled through the flexibility contract is because who would know better how to meet the needs of the student than a local school district through their local schools and their local teachers. This is an empowerment. I mean, it is different, and you know, if you want to have a monolithic infrastructure, just have a uniform measure, but you certainly don't get the flexibility and the nimbleness that we need to be able to respond. I'm all for measurement of student achievement, but I believe it's got to be reasonable. It's got to be rational.
Number 25, Representative Kaiser.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I have to ask this since my folks are here from the charter school in my district. And you may not have thought of this, but knowing you, I bet you have. Would charter schools be given the flexibility to have formative assessments that are different than the school district has or says that they need to be given if they still meet the requirements of the bill? You may not.
It was pointed out to
Lou
me
may know
today
behind
that
you.
probably it was an omission not to have addressed charter schools. I thought they would have been anyway because they were public schools, but if we need to make that clarification that state charter schools and private charter schools ought to be brought in under this law.
Well, if I can just clarify, they're the charter school. I mean, they're public charter schools.
They are.
So, but they have the flexibility now. So I'm just wondering if that had been discussed at all.
You know, an attempt at this is to give all schools, both,
right.
I mean, charter or traditional public schools, flexibility to use their resources to maximize student achievement in the way that is deemed to be most appropriate in the individual settings.
All right, we have 20, then 11. 20.
That's me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Tippins. Two questions. If you could I'm trying to visualize the SLOs as far as I kind of know what we're doing today, which is we're taking a pre-test at the beginning of the year and then a post-test at the end of the year, and all these things are being developed, and because of all the courses in the high school, it has been, in my opinion, a pretty significant, I wouldn't say disruption, but it has taken a lot of energy and time I've seen in the high schools in my area to deal with the SLOs. So we kind of know that that's what's going on there. So what is your vision, though? I'm still trying to wrap my mind around, we're still doing 30% student growth. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it's 5 years from now, and we've developed this bill and we've implemented it. What does it look like? Are we just going to pick pieces of what happens in the classroom to pick the student growth? This is a hard problem to solve, and so I'm just trying to figure out what the vision is for the replacement for, you're saying you're getting rid of it, but you're leaving the student growth. So where are we going in 5 years?
Well, I think the person that can probably best address that is either the superintendent or Deputy Superintendent McGibney as to what the options would be to still guarantee that we have a fair assessment.
Love to hear that if one of them could address that. Yeah.
You want to do it or what?
Yeah.
Looking at the SLOs, again, looking at the flexibility, right now we're looking at just saying there would be one growth measure. In other words, there would be one test. Typically what could take place as I was a teacher, I could be teaching 6 different courses. And that means I would be giving 6 different SLOs if they were individually with that, in which at a small school system that would not be unheard of. Now, by doing that, by reducing at least the number to one growth measure, we only have one that you're dealing with. But you would still have a pre-test, you would still have a post-test. Now, what that test looked like, again, of course, would be determined, worked out through the local administration and working with the teacher in conjunction of establishing growth. Because what you may find out is that, say you were doing weights. Well, weights, and you're looking at what is the growth there could be that you're looking at, I can only bench 100 pounds on day 1, but at the end of the year, I can bench, 300 pounds. And so you would see that would be a little bit different. Or if you're in a music class, I mean, determining, of how do you measure those, at least it would give the flexibility at the local level to determine, what they could do as far as actually measuring success. So it gives a little bit more flexibility to the local level, but also cuts down the required number of tests as well. Right now, we're in conjunction where it will be, I think next year, where everyone will be doing 2 growth measures. So it gives the schools there. But it does allow for flexibility the schools could do, or they could have as many as they wish. So again, that's, up to the local school system.
So I'm looking at the current law for the SLOs. It does say the word growth measures into the law. So the interpretation department is for SLOs starting next year, that there's saying 2 tests or a test with 2 different parts?
There would be 2 test measures, which typically that would mean two tests that they would give. But that would be for 2 different courses or classes, whatever they would.
I understand that, but if I'm a kid, I'm a kid taking band 2. Am I taking 1 test at the beginning of that class and 1 at the end?
You would take a pre-test and a post-test in that class, yes, sir.
But both before and after this bill, though. But it may be different how that test is come up with. But I'm still saying that in my 5-year down the road scenario, the kid is still taking a test for band 2. It may be the same as some other ones. You don't have as many, and it's a lot less burden on the teacher. But from the kid's point of view, he's still taking a test pre and post. Is that the vision?
I think you would still be taking a pre and post test. Now, what that looks like, there definitely would be flexibility, but it would be worked at the local level between the administrator and the teacher, or the district and the teachers as well.
The other thing I would say, Mr. Chairman, real quickly, is just you're doing the math here, since I'm the math nerd. The current state assessment requires 32 plus SLOs. The new bill would be 26 plus the SLO replacement, whatever we're talking about, and the federal is a 17 plus the SLOs. So
that would be the milestones, I think.
That's right.
32, yeah.
That's right. So and that's milestones EOCTs, which is 32 days over, taking SLOs out of it, it's 32 days over a 12-year career, 26 over a 12-year career bill. So, we're talking about less than 3 days a year. I want to make sure that the public understands that the people who are upset, like the chairman was saying, about 30 days of testing or whatever, the state requirement is not 30 days of testing. Chairman Carter made that point too.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that there's not a perception that we're not dramatically lowering the number of student tests, even with Chairman Tippin's bill is what I'm saying here. So
you still have your local,
I think the greatest gain is going to be in the area of SLOs.
Yeah.
I think in terms of the amount of investment in human resources that we're having to put into that to say that we're meeting a compliance model. I continue to hear we're giving an assessment. How relevant it is or how valid it is not necessarily been proven, and I think it's questioned by a lot of people. I do think that there is a disproportionate amount of time or resources being required by SLOs and when evaluated from a return on investment standpoint of what we're really getting out of it. I'll submit to you that if people talk about deficiencies in Georgia education, they're not talking about art, music, and PE.
You're correct.
We need to keep our eye on the ball. Where we're getting our brains beat out, number one, is in reading and mathematics, and then science and social studies to follow. If we get those right, the rest of it's going to take care of itself.
As a follow-up, I know we're going to have more things than we can figure out here today. As a follow-up for the department especially, I would like to see sort of the current SLO model as far as the level of effort from the locals and where the tests come and where they're approved and how many the kids are taking and how many a teacher might have to deal with now. And then with Senator Tippin's bill, what the sort of vision is for the future. We can't answer that today. It's too complicated, but I think that discussion is very important. I'd like to see some data from the department about that.
Okay, you got
Thank
that?
you.
Got that? All right, All right, now we have a couple, three more questions, but others can ask. All right, Reverend Stovall.
Yes. Thank you, Senator Tippins, for the bill. I do have a question. When you look at the on line 13, going into 14, where it says development of the evaluation will be in consultation with the stakeholders. And my question with the stakeholders, did that include parents and students as far as being able to have some kind of say-so, or was that considered for parents and students having some kind of say-so into the evaluation that's being done for the principals, teachers, and assistant principals as well.
Well, certainly parents are stakeholders. I think one of the greatest challenges we face in education is getting the involvement of that segment of the stakeholders. It has been my experience in the past, if you have parents who want to be involved, you can certainly get their feedback. And sometimes you get more than you want. I can say that from a former school board standpoint. But in terms of expectations of parents, I mean, certainly some have specific areas that they have interest in, and I think good leadership always listens because they are the stakeholders. They are the people that you have to answer to, as well as society as a whole. But you know, I don't know that I would necessarily say that they know more about the design of tests than people who've spent a lifetime designing tests. And I'm not saying that you dismiss their opinion, but they are a stakeholder. But the expectation that I always heard as a school board member, I want my child to get a good education. I want them to be prepared for a college or a career and get it right. And that's what this bill attempts to do, is to get it right from kindergarten through 12th grade. We've made great strides in education in the last few years. And it's I hope it's not a disjointed or a piecemeal approach, even though it's been done by several different initiatives legislatively, but it all ought to be in a process that you start with a proposition. If a kid comes into kindergarten and they've never had any formal exposure to education, you can take them at that basic level, and at 3rd grade you've got a benchmark, and you're not going to wait till the end of 3rd grade to figure out they're not there. It's going to be a trajectory of learning, and we're going to have some benchmarks to know if they're not on task or on target. At the end of 5th grade, they're going to be ready to go into middle school, make the transition of being able to learn how to be critical thinkers, how to learn how to gather and evaluate data, all of those skills that you need to be successful in their high school training. And when you think of the broad array of options that we've given for high school, the fundamental piece of it, the foundation that the whole building is on, is K-5 education. And I know enough about the construction industry. If you don't get the foundation right, the walls are going to crack and the roof's going to fall in. So we've got to get it right to start with.
Question, Representative Carter, you have a question, and then 28. That's our last 2 questions. All right, Representative Carter.
Comments first, and then I still have the question that's lingering that I asked earlier. But one, regarding the testing window, I have some concern. I'll be the number one person to say that we have been testing way too early in the school year. I praise that. But I have some concerns about the seniors who are graduating and taking that test in the last week and getting those grades back, especially if it's graded elsewhere. And you know, again, I know we're going to work on that, but that is a concern of mine. 2 other comments. One is that I teach 4 different classes. 3 of them are pathway classes on the same pathway and 1 that's separate. But out of my 4 classes that I teach, I only give 1 SLO every year. So I realize that we're saying that we're giving all these tests, but me as a classroom teacher is only given 1 SLO. I say 1 SLO, meaning a pre-test and a post-test, so it's 2 days of testing that last about 45 minutes each. But I'm only giving 1 SLO per year. It's not that I'm having to give 1 SLO for all 4 different classes that I teach. So I do want to just make that comment to just explain that. The last comment I want to make is that I truly do value constructive criticism. It makes my day when my administrator comes in my room to watch me teach. It truly does. And I want feedback, good or bad. I want to know what I'm doing well and what I'm not doing well. And my concern is that it's my understanding that these evaluations are still coming out at 98 to 99% jam up. And so my point in saying that is I'm ready for administrators to really give us the feedback that I think teachers deserve and need in order to be as absolutely effective as they can be. So that's just my last comment. The question I had, though, is that what happens, again, back on Section 2, when the student does not pass or doesn't do well on the reading and the math that we talked about, and I realize we want them to do well, that's the goal, but are we let's say you have 250 students in the 4th grade, or in the 5th grade, and they take that test and 50 of them don't do well. Are we looking at an early intervention program? I mean, what do we do when 50 of those 250 students do not do well on that test?
I've got to say before he comments, that's been with Senator Tippins. We've talked and talked and talked with Mr. McGivens, been my talk. That's the same thing I've said. We know right now.
Who?
I can tell you the students that are failing math, reading. For 50 years, we've said these students aren't there. We've talked about reading recovery, intervention, summer programs. We never do them. So my question, thank you. That was a question I was going to ask later. What is the state going to do to see that those students are taught? I mean, we know how to teach reading, but what are we going to do? And I've been heard it's going to be in the contract. So, but that's a great question. So.
I think common knowledge is if you don't know the answer, you always start out by saying, that's a great question. I think I know a little bit about what I foresee the answer being. The reason I wanted 1st and 2nd grade test with formative assessments is because you won't wait till the end of 3rd grade to find out that a kid can't read. You won't wait till the 4th grade. You'll have a documented record of it. Not that you're going to beat somebody over the head with it, but you won't have people coming back and saying, my goodness alive, had I known that this child was where they are on a nationally normed test, we could have done something sooner. I mean, the fact that we don't have any requirements on a benchmark test for 1st and 2nd grade, I think is a management area. We say we've got a 3rd grade gateway now, but what we're doing, we're waiting until the end of the 3rd grade. I mean, we're waiting until the sheep get to the gate and say, you know, you can't get through it. And we're jumping them over the fence with social promotion. We say we've done away with social promotion. That's a fiction. Yeah. We've probably got as much social promotion now, if not more so, than we've ever had. And I don't say, let's fail kids. That's the answer. That's not the answer. The answer is to have continuous improvement and make sure we have continuous improvement. I want to know where those kids are in 1st grade. I want a longitudinal data system that, you know, I've run a company for a long time, and sometimes you just have to go sort it out and say, who screwed this thing up? And but you know, you need to know who screwed it up, but you also need to know how you're going to fix it. And the earlier you know what the problem is, the quicker you can get on it. I think from a management standpoint, I mean, if I was the god of education, I'd be putting some time back in elementary school from oversight from the state and looking at these 1st, 2nd, and 3rd benchmark tests. Look at the formative assessments. If we've got a good formative assessment, you're not going to wake up one day in the 4th grade and say, this kid's got a problem. Somebody's going to know it all the time. And if they've been negligent in addressing it, you know, that's when you have a come to Jesus talk with them.
But when the superintendent says that we can use the test that we're currently using,
if it gives you that type of feedback, if it's an inferior test and if it truly does not tell you the proficiency of that child, we're not hurting the adults. We're hurting the kids.
So, but this is something we could have done last year. Like, do we need the legislation to tell us to do this if we're already using those tests that were already in place? That we're not adding a test, we're using DIBELS and the other tests that are available. Why haven't we been doing this already?
You know, I wish I knew that answer. All I'm telling you is I'm not going to say why we hadn't done it, but I want to make it crystal clear. We're going to drive a stake in the ground, and we're going to say K-5, reading, and mathematics trumps anything else we've got in those classes. And if you've got to have flexibility of funds to get to that point, you need to have that flexibility. I care about every other subject out there, but But it's crazy to me to focus on social studies if a kid can't read. I can tell you, they're going to make low grades in social studies and science if they can't read.
You know, Senator, you and I talked about this, and I met with a group of teachers this weekend. The what? So what? We know. They say we know the children are failing. And I talked with a couple of your staff members about this. And we have first grade teachers that we know that have 12 and 13 and 14 levels of reading in one classroom. They can't teach them. I went in there, I taught reading. We need to allow them, as old Jim Cherry used to say, you should never have over 3 levels in a classroom. They want to do some cross-class grouping, some cross-grade grouping. They want to allow that. We talk about moving on when ready. And we talked about this week, and I asked these teachers, they said, my superintendent and my principal won't let me do that because I have to be the teacher of record. And that you can't do that. But I've asked them, give me some way to get away from that. A teacher may have 20 children, she never see them but 1 or 2 times that year because they're moving constantly. And they say we've eliminated the ability to help children because we're so concerned about teacher of record and who's going to be responsible. And that's something I want to ask next week. I want to answer. I mean, what do we tell these teachers? They're right. Yeah, that's right. We can't. But anybody want to comment? I don't.
Well,
and then I've got 3 more questions. I apologize, Joe. We're going to get you.
Well, I think, when you look at K-5 education, and I mean, and looking at, and I agree with Senator Tippins, I mean, reading and math are critical. I was a high school social studies teacher. I mean, my kids, I could teach content all day long, but it was reading and reading comprehension that I was not trained to do. But that, you should not hear remediation at the high school level. But what you have is in our current system, when you've got on grades 3, 4, and 5, and what we are expecting is that we are expecting mastery of grade content by the time they roll over. So from 3rd grade to 4th grade, that teacher's expecting mastery of that content. Because now what I'm being graded on, my certificate, my score, is that set of standards that I'm teaching that year. And so it does not allow for too much remediation or going back and building up that, because everything you begin to talk about is the test. And so you're moving that kid from point A to point B. Where
are you going to allow them to cross-grade group? You're going to allow them to move the children?
Well,
how are you going to get around that?
Well, I think by reducing some of the testing, we're trying to address that area. Like I said, one of the things that we did very poorly, and again, this comes out of No Child Left Behind, and when it first started, was the high-stakes testing in this area. It did not, again, if we could take it where the child actually was and measure them,
and let them move.
You can do that with MAPS and these other tests. Again, and I've been on record, when you look at milestones or whether it's CRCT, I mean, basically that is an autopsy-type report. You get it at the end of the year. And I think as what was alluded, talking at that, especially when we give it at the time of the year, I mean, most of the testing windows can be given in April. Well, I think as the senator mentioned, moving that test window back as much as we can, because what takes place is that our standards are designed to be taught for an entire year.
But I want you to answer my question. I know that. I want you to answer, but I understand all that.
Yeah.
Are you going to allow these teachers to move those children, 6 teachers? They can move them anywhere they want to, and how are you going to get around that teacher record? That's all I want to know. And I'm not asking you to give me an answer now.
Well,
I want an answer because I want to put that in this bill, that teachers feel free to move them and can help children. They don't feel free to. These teachers said, we don't feel free to help children.
Well,
we're trapped.
Yeah, well, the teacher record, I mean, it's easy to be done because we do it in high school and middle school. I mean, you can have a teacher be the teacher record, and then you can move them from class to class or whatever. That's easy to do. And like I said, whatever subject.
Well, we need to help these elementary, first grade teachers. I'm with you.
Like I said, we do that in middle school, high school, so that I do not see that being an issue.
Okay, so you're saying they can move them all they want to.
Do what is best for the child. That's bottom line. If they move, it means moving them 1,000 times for the benefit of the child, then they can do that. Like I said, we'll get the record, but
good.
That's something.
And I know we've talked about that can be in their contract and whatever, but we're not. We're tying their hands.
Yeah.
All right, let me get these other 3 questions. Then we're going to come back. Yes, sir.
I want to address that because I think it goes to the heart of what some of our problem is. I talked about Henry Ford. Whether y'all believe it or not, I was not alive when he built the first thing. But in terms of a history lesson, when I first went on the board at Cobb County, I was glad to get out of high school, and I never went back into public school if I could help it. I did go to college, but school was not real strong on my list of priorities when I was a teenager. But you know, I had to come up to speed when I got on the school board. And I had a friend of mine that came on the same time I did. His wife was a fourth grade teacher. And I asked him, I said, does Linda know where her students are academically? She had about 22, 23 students in class. He said, yes, because coming into fourth grade, they were given ITBS at the end of third grade, and they had a math and a reading component, and they knew where they were from a national norm standpoint. I said, well, can you get me a listing numerically, not with the children's names, but just a number as they appear on the roll, and their reading and mathematics scores? He said, yeah, I think I can do that. And so he brought it in the next day. And in a fourth grade student, you know what the lowest reading score was and the highest reading score? I'll go ahead and tell you. The lowest reading score was the second grade, the fourth month. But now get this, the highest reading score was the 11th grade, the second month. I told him, I said, Kurt, we've returned to a one-room schoolhouse. And when we had the discussions about it in terms of county policy, they said, well, we've got differentiated instruction. I said, you know, when you've got differentiated instruction that spans 9 grades, I'm not sure how efficient that can be. And I started lobbying for exactly what you're talking about, as a more homogeneous grouping where you don't have as great a span or range in student achievement in one class. And I was told initially you can't do it because it's tracking. Got to check it on it. It's not tracking if you separate them by achievement and not by ability. The key is you've got to have frequent assessments, which is a formative assessment. And you've also got to have mobility within the group. If the kid's overrated or underrated, they can go to the group below or the group above. They can be over their head, or they can be bored. And I think part of our discipline problems today is kids are bored. But you got to remember about this: the kid that's over his head, kid can drown in 2 inches of water just as easy as they can 100 feet of water. And I lobbied to get the same type of instruction you're talking about, a closer grouping, have these flexible groupings. Was told it wasn't going to work. I said, well, I'll quit talking about it when we do it if you prove it wouldn't work. And I was told, well, all the research shows it didn't work. I said, well, I want to see my own research. I want to see Cobb County research. And I was told, well, no principal in the county wants to institute something like this in his school. I said, well, one of them does, because I've already talked to him about it. And so they said, okay, we'll pilot it in one school and one grade. And for about 4 months' time, from whenever school started in August till Christmas, they were wanting to hang me and the principal in effigy because it was different. But when the scores came out at Christmas time in the evaluation, people's eyes were as big as pie pans. And the reason they were big was because every student got more achievement, greater achievement than they had on average before. But you know who the great gainers were? Those on each end of the spectrum. Those in the middle got more achievement than had been normal. But the ones on both ends of the spectrum, the low kids and the high kids, they were the ones that really benefited from it. This is the kind of flexibility that'll give us that ability. Is it going to be easy? Probably not. Is it going to be something they've done before? Probably not. Are you going to have people saying, we've never done this before, we don't know how to do it? And that's okay. But that's not the way you get return on investment. You've got to be bold, but you've got to have the ability to be bold. You've got to have the flexibility to be bold. And this bill gives them that. We need to be leaders.
I agree. Let me give you this. I agree. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You hit it right on the head. But I just think we got free teachers. They're scared to try some of these things because 28. I got 28, 22, and 20. All right, 28.
I'm here.
Oh yeah.
And
Janet.
Representative Carter asked my question, but I'm still really concerned about those 3rd and 5th graders. But I really appreciate, Senator, your bringing this bill and listening to what teachers have said. Thank you.
22.
You and I obviously agree on some things.
We agreed on most everything. We both like ice cream.
I wasn't alive when the Model T came out either. But I do have a couple of concerns.
Chairman Cumberland bought one of them.
I knew he was older than me. There are a couple of things that concern me, and I need to say the same thing that I've said just about every time we've talked about evaluation of teachers, and that is we need to spend a little more time making sure that we have leadership folks properly trained to do those evaluations before they're really going to accomplish what we expect for them to do. And I'm not sure that you got it in your bill or I got in my bill, either one. But I think that's something we've got to look at. I would have to say to you, the section of your bill that starts actually on line 25, where you go into evaluations of school systems that are not under a flexibility contract, that A, B, C, and D that come under that causes me some concern. Regardless of what a school system has agreed to do, we're not talking about the system. We're actually talking about individual teachers and the impact on individual teachers and principals. And I don't see a rationale for treating them any differently depending on how that system, and it obviously only applies to two systems. That causes me some concern.
Well, Representative or Chairman, it does me too. I think to get the flexibility coupled with the accountability, I think that was a whole concept, but behind the schools electing to have flexibility contracts, either with strategic waivers or as a charter district. I thought that the state in its legislation and the creation of that was very clear. The accountability's got to be there as well as the granting of the flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
Those districts who have opted to remain status quo have opted to stay under current school law with no waivers. I'm not telling you that's right. I'm not telling you it's wrong. I think numerically both of those districts make up about 1/4 of 1% of the students in the state of Georgia. I wish there was a better accountability model that would apply to them. I'm not opposed to some mechanism to bring those teachers in the same way the rest of them are, or the leadership. But I think you've got to have the guarantee of accountability, and the flexibility contracts is what gives that. And I don't think being under Title 20, where they have opted not to be under an accountability contract, I don't know how you grant the flexibility other than just say everybody do what you want to, and we're not going to keep score.
Or with some type of contract, yeah.
Right.
We have to do something like that, yeah. But that could be done, I think.
But to say that a teacher who is in System A, 30% of their evaluation is going to be based on the test data, but a teacher in System B is going to be 50%.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with you. It does not appear to be fair, but the contractual relationship and the dealings are between the state and the LEA.
But you're not asking for a waiver for the teachers in A.
But you are in the flexibility contracts. You're asking for an accountability of performance that a status quo district does not have. Now,
but the teacher is still accountable in this system that is not a flexible contract system, because if you don't get a good evaluation 2 years in a row over here in System B, your certification's in jeopardy. The same as it is over here in System A with 30% of your test score.
I'm not arguing with you. If you can find a way to fix it where you've got accountability.
I think that is accountability. So my fix would be I'm going to take out
part out.
those three little pieces of code.
Chairman Dixon and I and Chairman Tippins, Senator Tippins, we've talked about that. And to me, when this becomes a law, it's a law. People are going to abide by the law that the superintendent's governing. And there seems to be no reason we couldn't do a separate contract for this part for those two systems. They don't maybe get the expenditure controlled or whatever, but they could surely be given. We could work that out, I think. And that's something we're probably going. I've talked with you about. We'd like to look at. All right.
This is not a new conversation.
Yes, sir. We just start with. Hey, today's a work session, right? Representative Dudgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my understanding from the data that's been gathered so far with the current evaluation system that if you just do the evaluation piece and don't have the testing piece, you just take the 50% that's classroom evaluation, that all the scores kind of bunch up towards the top of the scale, and that if you broadens out the distribution of the teacher, in other words, there's a big smush up in the 3 and 4 rating area, and that the way that the distribution actually evens out is by factoring some of the test score data in there. And so, and I know you're not advocating to go to 0 test score data in there. You're talking about lowering it to 30 or really 20 from the state perspective. Is there anything, is that 30 the right number? Some of the research I've read is like that 33 to 50 are the right numbers. Is there anything sacred about the 30 and 20? Or are we just trying to do a balance? In other words, and if we run, the State Department, they run the numbers, what would the evaluation curve look like, so to speak, if we ran it at 30% or especially 20% for the state? What would that distribution look like if that happened?
Well, from my standpoint as author of the bill, I can't tell you that I have compelling research that shows that 30% is a magic number. I've heard some people say we want to go as low as 10. My feeling was this: student achievement, when you get right down to it, that is our core business. That's what we're looking for. This bill does change the conversation somewhat to looking at the inputs to more positively affect that maybe. I do feel like it has to be enough to be meaningful, because that is our core business. And I figured, around a third, I could have lived with 30%. I could have lived with 35. I just think when you've got people, if you're at 50 and you've got people that are talking 10, pardon? Well, you've been here as long as I have. You know how this thing works. I told somebody the other day, I've had about 15 people that want to come in and change the bill. I said, well, it's like the guy that was going to swim the river to steal the chain. Sometimes you can steal more chain than you can swim back with. I think you just got to forget what you're going to be able to pass.
Let me tell you, the hour's getting late, but however, we have two people that I want to hear from. But I want to tell you, the two of y'all have done a great job. I'm going to tell you, I have, Superintendent, you have, great job. And I just can't believe how well you've done, Senator. You have impressed me today. I tell you, I just appreciate y'all. And
you're easy to impress.
Impress, yeah. But Superintendent, I want to tell you, your people, I don't want y'all to leave. We're not letting you off the hot seat, right? Stay right there. But I want to tell you, your people have been very helpful with our staff, and they've worked well, and you have, and I appreciate what y'all have done. But I'd like to ask Representative Nix now, because he has done a lot of work. I'd like for him to sum up Section A, what he sees, and what are some of the suggestions we've made. Then I'd like to ask Representative Chandler to sum up what they've done, and then we'll go from there. I do plan to continue this on Wednesday, and when we'll be talking, may have 2 meetings Wednesday, but definitely going to have one at 2 o'clock. So, Representative Nix.
Thank you. The only thing I would say to sum it up is it seems like we get pretty prescriptive in some of the things, like defining professional growth pretty specifically. Some of the other things that we seem to maybe be a little bit more prescriptive than we were before. That was the only thing that I had any questions on. I think overall, I understand where you're going. I think we're headed in the right direction. As I said earlier, as the person who sponsored the original bill, we need to tweak this thing. I don't think we need to throw it completely out, because there are people out there who've made it work. They've made the slows work. They've made it all work. So I don't want to tell them that they wasted all their time. So we just kind of come back in and make those changes and make it work for everybody. So I appreciate the work on it. We'll continue to look at it. Thank you.
Chairman Nix, we've also, one thing we've talked about in that first section, and Representative Dixon mentioned that's the concern about the two schools that are not flexible. We've asked, we've asked Betsy to look at some legislation or substitute to maybe address that, and I've given you that. You have that. You know where we're looking at, and I'd like to share, if you could stick around, I'd like to share that with Superintendent Woods. Also, the 90, I think you talked about maybe a 90% we'd like to see, and I think you have no problem with that. We've talked about that. And we've talked about, there's something else that we haven't said that that came up and that we're looking at is maybe an appeal.
Yeah.
Some type of an appeal, and we don't need to make that thing too, I don't want to say easy, but we don't want to make it maybe technical. So you want to maybe make a comment about that?
Yeah, I thought we were going to hold that till next time around.
I want to put it out where he'll know where they can talk about it.
And you probably too have been told by a number of educators that we don't have an effective appeal for them if they come in with a less than a stellar evaluation. I've been told by some that they come in, they're observed, they put the information together to show what they're going to do, and it's not even considered. And then they are not able to appeal that, and that puts them in jeopardy down the road. I'd like to come up with some way to put in an appeals process so that the educators could be able to appeal that in some form. And Amy, you're shaking your head over there. Well, I'm talking right now, so let me get finished. But I've had that come to me a number of times. The other thing that has been brought up is the fact that we've got 4 ratings. It is developed into a quota system, and we need to have some type of direction that says this is not a quota system. This is for each educator to be evaluated on, get feedback, get critique. And look at how they improve themselves rather than a quota system that we've got to have X in this category, X in this category, X in this category. So those are 2 things that I would like to see if we can work into there somehow.
All right, I've opened up Pandora's box. Comment, Representative Carr, and then comment, Representative Dixon. Chairman Dixon. All right.
Thank you. I've been through TEKS for 3 years now, and not with every evaluation that I get, but certainly with the 2 biggie evaluations, I have to sign off. And with the sign off on the platform, you have a box that you can type as much comments as you want to type in that. And then after you type your comments, you sign off on it. And that's as much of record as the evaluation as the administrator did it. So I'm not real sure why an appeal process is necessary when you have access to comment before you sign off on your evaluation. And every teacher has to sign off on those evaluations, on specific ones.
Let's see what Chairman Dixon can add to that. Gar?
I know from my perspective, when we have talked about an appeal process, it's not an appeal on, I don't think you rated me high enough. It's an appeal where instances where the administrator who is performing the evaluation has not followed the proper methodology, due process has not been implemented, to give them a means whereby they can appeal to, for instance, perhaps the HR at the system level. So it's not let's argue about what my rating is. It's let's argue about, did you do it the way it was supposed to be done?
Okay.
Okay. We may want that's
is that a different? I thought that might be a different ballgame than what you're talking about.
And it is, but I'm wondering if we need to put that in legislation. I mean, I feel comfortable to go to my HR director or my principal or anyone else to talk to them about.
There are a number in the state who are not.
Chime in,
I would say this is something we have discussed, and it is something we feel very comfortable we could put in guidance, at the DOE. So that is something we should consider. Yeah,
maybe
but
where
I'm
we
just saying
go.
This is where we felt. I mean, in talking with policy, we felt very comfortable. This is an area where it did not have to be a part of legislation, but we definitely could put it within guidance within the department itself.
All right. Representative Nix, all right, you can give us the final statement on that, and go to Chairman and we'll because I don't want to keep you because I've been threatened if I keep you too much longer. All right.
And that's what we're talking about in terms of the process, so that they can make sure that they had their opportunity to participate. And having talked with some of the people and staff there, they said that could be made much more firm in the manual as to how these are done. So it may not be necessary to do it in terms of legislation, but I'm glad that y'all are having that discussion, because that's probably one of the bigger feedbacks I've got. And the last comment I make on that is, I think that just shows you that some systems probably do it much better than others. Some people are open to that. Some people just like to slam the door and get it done and move on, rather than listening and using this as feedback for the teacher's improvement.
All right. Representative Chandler, Representative Clark, y'all take just a few minutes to sum up, because we're going to deal with yours in great detail Wednesday. So, all right?
And this is quick, because our questions have answered and your comments have covered much of what we were concerned about, and we appreciate that. I do want to do this, though. Thank you, Dr. Gibney. He is responsible for this chart. Yes. Representative Clark and I did not do it, and we appreciate it because it very clearly lets you see what the changes are. And then I have one closing question from some teachers in my district, because you will have a better answer than I had. Why are we still requiring more testing than the federal government does?
You asking me?
We're asking the superintendent.
Both of you.
We'll ask the superintendent. We'll ask the superintendent.
I don't mind answering that. In my mind, to effectively evaluate performance, I think you need benchmarks. I'm not sure the federal government ought to be the final say. That's all they require. But I think if they were managing the delivery of the system and they were going to be effective in their management, they'd get more feedback than that. One thing I meant to point out a while ago when I talked about Henry Ford, I'm not talking about education that's an assembly line or an education process that has standardized parts. In the state of Georgia, we're talking about 1,700,000 individuals plus every day that we're educating. You cannot standardize that, but I do think that the individual aspect of this is what's important.
Okay. All right. You want to make a comment?
Again, yes, sir.
Yes,
very quick. I do want to thank I think our state school teacher of the year, Ernie Lee. He is here with us today. So, Ernie, I mean,
we introduced him earlier.
Yeah, we want to recognize him and many there. But I think that what we looked at is that many times with this process, it's something we've always done. I mean, it goes back to the CRCT, and you look at the creation there. That I think that sometimes the bureaucracy just takes hold. And we went to transition from CRCT to milestones. It was just, we just kept on doing it. We did not look at what we had to have and what what was already in state law. I think this is within state law, but we just didn't make the correction. And so at this time, this is what we're asking. Let's make the correction while we can, and while the flexibility has been thrown up to us from the federal government as well.
Thank you. That's a meeting for today. Now, again, listen very carefully.
Valerie?
Pardon? Oh, Valerie, do you have a comment? I'm sorry. Yes. No, what's your number?
It's 29.
All right, yeah, I'm sorry.
Absolutely, thank you all. Senator Tippins and Mr. Chairman, also Dr. McGivney, and our folks who have worked so hard on this, Chairman Dixon and our Chairman Dr. Coleman. Thank you all for what you've done. This is a great thing for our teachers and ultimately for our children. Appreciate it so much.
I just want to thank Representative Clark, the work they did. They've worked hard. Representative Chairman Nix, what y'all did, you worked very hard. The schedule now, where you'll know, Wednesday, 2 o'clock. We'll probably have about a 2, maybe a 3-hour meeting. I hate to say that, but we're going to have comments from the audience. That will be comment from the audience. We'll have Senator Tippins to just briefly go over the bill because we've heard it. So he'll go over it, tell us what the bill is about. We'll have comments from the audience. Then we'll have questions for Senator Tippins. And please, we'd like to invite you all back, the State Department of Education, your staff back for questions. And then we may, if we feel we need it, we may have a meeting Wednesday morning just to, smooth out some rough edges if we feel we need to. But definitely at 2 o'clock on Wednesday. We're not technically in session, but that is a day when we are allowed to have committee meetings. They are legal, and everybody expects to be here. And I want to encourage every committee member to be here. Any questions from anyone? You're adjourned. Have a good weekend. Thank y'all so much. Appreciate our presenters, y'all.